Jake Miller had spent most of his life chasing one dream: becoming a professional basketball player in the United States. From early mornings practicing on cracked neighborhood courts to late nights training in empty gyms, he had sacrificed almost everything for the game. Now at 28, his hard work was finally paying off. His team was climbing the league rankings. Sports reporters were starting to notice his name, and sponsors were beginning to show interest. But success had also brought something unexpected into Jake's life. Doubt over the past year. Jake had started noticing subtle changes in the people around him. Friends who once ignored him suddenly wanted to hang out. Relatives he barely knew began calling to congratulate him. Even strangers treated him differently. Once they recognized him from television. The change that hurt the most, however, was in his own home. His wife, Emily, had always been supportive during the early years, when Jake struggled to make money. Back then, they shared small apartments, cheap dinners, and long conversations about their future. She used to watch every game proudly from the stands. But lately, something felt different. Emily had become more interested in the glamorous side of Jake's career. The parties, the attention, the money. She talked more about brand deals and luxury trips than about the game itself. Sometimes Jake wondered if she loved him, or the life that came with being a rising sports star. The thought disturbed him deeply. One night after returning from a road game, Jake sat alone in his living room, staring at the television, while sports highlights played silently in the background. Emily was upstairs scrolling through social media, barely acknowledging his return. A question kept repeating in his mind. If everything disappeared tomorrow, would she still stay? The idea sounded crazy at first, but it slowly turned into a plan. Jake decided he needed the truth, no matter how painful it might be. 3 days later, his team played an important home game. The arena was packed with thousands of cheering fans. Bright lights shone across the court, while commentators shouted excitedly about the match. Midway through the second quarter, Jake saw his moment. He jumped for a rebound, then suddenly collapsed to the floor, grabbing his knee in apparent agony. A loud gasp spread through the crowd. The referee blew the whistle. Immediately, Jake groaned loudly. Acting as if he couldn't move, his teammates rushed over. Coaches called for medical staff within seconds. The arena that had been filled with excitement became tense and silent. "Jake, can you stand?" a trainer asked urgently. Jake shook his head, pretending to struggle. Pain twisted across his face. As 2 medics helped lift him onto a stretcher, cameras zoomed in while commentators spoke in worried tones. "This could be very serious," one announcer said from the stretcher. Jake glanced briefly toward the stands. Emily was there. She looked shocked, her hands covering her mouth as she watched the scene unfold. Within an hour, the news had spread across sports channels and social media. Jake Miller, possible career-ending knee injury. But as the ambulance carried him toward the hospital, Jake stared silently at the ceiling. His knee felt perfectly fine because the injury wasn't real. It was only the beginning of a test that would reveal who truly stood beside him, and who was only there for the spotlight. The hospital room was quiet, except for the steady beeping of the heart monitor. Jake Miller lay still on the bed, staring at the white ceiling above him. His knee was wrapped in thick bandages, part of the act he had carefully planned with a trusted team doctor, who had agreed to keep the secret for a few days. Outside the room, reporters and fans were already spreading rumors. Some said Jake's injury might end his career. Others were hoping it was only temporary. Sports channels replayed the moment of his fall again and again. But inside the hospital room, Jake was thinking about only one person: Emily. Late in the evening, the door slowly opened and Emily walked in. Her eyes were red as if she had been crying. She rushed toward the bed and grabbed Jake's hand tightly. "Oh my God, Jake, I was so scared," she said softly. Jake forced a weak smile, playing his role perfectly. "The doctor said it might be serious," he replied quietly. "They're not sure if I'll be able to play again." Emily's face froze for a brief moment. It was quick, so quick that most people wouldn't notice it. But Jake did. He had been watching her carefully. She quickly nodded and hugged him again. "Don't worry, everything will be okay," she said for the next hour. She sat beside him, speaking gently and acting like a worried wife. She asked the nurse questions and checked on him repeatedly. But as the night grew quieter, something began to change. Emily's phone buzzed at first. She ignored it. Then it buzzed again and again. Finally, she stood up. "I'm just going to step outside for a minute," she said. Jake closed his eyes. Pretending to sleep, the door clicked shut. A few minutes passed, then 10. Jake slowly opened his eyes. The room was empty. He carefully sat up in the bed and looked toward the small table beside him. Emily had left her tablet there. At first he hesitated, A voice in his mind told him not to invade her privacy, but another voice reminded him why he had created this test in the first place. Jake picked up the tablet. The screen lit up. What he saw made his chest tighten. Emily was logged into a dating website. Jake stared in disbelief as he opened the profile page. There it was, her smiling photo and a short description written just hours ago. Young woman looking for a fresh start. Life can change overnight. His heart began to pound harder. He scrolled down further. There were already several messages from men, and Emily had replied to some of them. Jake felt a strange mix of emotions: shock, anger, and deep sadness. The news about his injury had only been out for a few hours, yet Emily had already taken the first step toward finding someone. New footsteps suddenly echoed in the hallway. Jake quickly placed the tablet back on the table and lay down again. Pretending to be asleep, the door opened softly. Emily walked back in. She sat quietly beside him, unaware that Jake now knew more than she realized. As Jake kept his eyes closed, one painful thought filled his mind. If this was how she reacted on the very first night, what would happen in the days to come? The next few days in the hospital felt longer than Jake Miller had expected. Every hour seemed to bring a new revelation, and each one hurt more than the last. Jake continued pretending to be weak and injured. Doctors came and went, nurses checked his bandages, and reporters kept asking for updates about his condition. Officially, the story remained the same. Jake's knee injury was serious, and his basketball career might be over. But the real story was unfolding quietly inside his hospital room. Emily's behavior began to change, almost immediately after the first night. On the second day, she stayed only for a short visit. She sat beside Jake, asked a few questions about the doctor's report, and then glanced at her phone repeatedly. "I have to run some errands," she said quickly. "I'll come back later." She never returned that evening. Jake spent the night alone, staring at the dim hospital lights and thinking about everything he had seen on her tablet. The third day was even worse. Emily arrived in the afternoon, wearing makeup and stylish clothes. That seemed unusual for someone visiting an injured husband. In the hospital, she spoke kindly, but there was a strange distance in her voice. While she thought Jake was asleep, she sat by the window, scrolling through her phone and smiling at messages. Jake didn't need to see the screen to know what she was doing. Later that evening, someone else visited Jake. His best friend, Marcus. Marcus had known Jake since childhood. He had been there during the tough years, when Jake struggled to make it as an athlete. Unlike many people in Jake's life, Marcus had never changed when Marcus entered the room. "He looked worried, man. Everyone's talking about your injury." Marcus said quietly, "They're saying you might never play again." Jake sighed, still pretending to be weak. "That's what the doctors think." Marcus hesitated for a moment, then lowered his voice. "There's something else you should know." Jake turned his head slowly. "What is it?" Marcus looked uncomfortable. "I ran into Emily yesterday at a cafe downtown." He said she wasn't alone. Jake felt a cold wave run through his chest. Marcus continued carefully. "She was sitting with some guy. They looked pretty close." Jake stayed silent. Marcus sighed, "And I overheard something she was telling him. That your career was probably finished, and that she didn't know if she could stay in the marriage anymore." The words hit Jake harder than any physical injury could. For a moment, the room felt completely still. Deep down, Jake had already suspected something like this. The dating profile, the secret messages, the sudden distance, it all pointed in the same direction. But hearing it confirmed by someone else made the truth impossible to ignore. Emily hadn't just reacted badly to the news. She had already started planning a life without him. After Marcus left, Jake sat quietly in the dark hospital room. His test had only been running for 3 days, yet it had already exposed more than he ever expected. Now Jake faced a difficult decision. Should he continue pretending and watch how far Emily would go? Or should he reveal the truth and end the painful game once and for all? By the 7th day, Jake Miller had seen enough. The hospital room that once felt like a place of recovery had turned into a silent stage, where the truth about his marriage slowly revealed itself. Each day brought another small sign that Emily was already moving on. She visited less and less. Sometimes she stayed only 10 minutes before leaving with an excuse. Other times she didn't come at all, sending short text messages instead. "Hope you're feeling better busy today. I'll visit tomorrow," but tomorrow rarely came. Jake had also checked her tablet again, when she forgot it during another visit. The dating profile had become more active. New messages appeared every day, and Emily seemed eager to respond. She wasn't just curious anymore. She was searching at first. The discovery had filled Jake with anger, but after several days of thinking, that anger slowly turned into something else: clarity. The fake injury had done exactly what he wanted. It had shown him the truth. On the 7th afternoon, Jake decided it was time to end the test. He called Marcus and asked him to come to the hospital. Then he sent Emily a message, asking her to visit because he needed to discuss something important. An hour later, Emily walked into the room. Marcus was already there, standing near the window. Emily looked slightly confused. "What's going on?" she asked. Jake slowly sat up in the hospital bed. The bandage was still wrapped around his knee, but his expression was calm. "I wanted both of you here," he said. Emily frowned slightly. "Why?" Jake took a deep breath, then without warning, he swung his legs off the bed and stood up. Emily's eyes widened in shock. "Jake, what are you doing?" she said quickly. "You shouldn't stand on that leg." Jake took a few normal steps across the room. There was no pain, no limp, nothing. Marcus watched quietly, already knowing the truth. Emily stared at Jake as the color slowly drained from her face. What is happening?" she whispered. Jake looked directly at her. "My knee was never injured," he said calmly. The room fell silent. Emily blinked in disbelief. "What do you mean?" Jake pulled out his phone and placed it on the table. On the screen were screenshots, her dating profile, the messages and the conversations Marcus had overheard. Her hands began to tremble. You were testing me?" she asked weakly. Jake nodded. "For 1 week," he said. "I wanted to know who would stay beside me if my career disappeared." Emily's eyes filled with panic. "Jake, listen. I can explain," but Jake gently raised his hand to stop her. "You already explained everything with your actions," he said quietly. Tears formed in Emily's eyes as she searched for words, but none came. Jake felt a strange calmness inside him. The fake injury had not ended his basketball career, but it had ended something else. Their marriage. Sometimes the hardest truth to accept is that the person standing beside you is only there for the spotlight, not for you.